The wind was a cold, biting thing on the rooftop ledge. It whipped my hair across my face, stinging my cheeks, but I barely felt it. The numbness inside me was a far deeper cold. Below, the city glittered, a sprawling jewel of ambition and betrayal. My empire. Or at least it should have been. Leo was gone. He'd chosen this exit, a final dramatic leap the day his beloved Isolde married another man. A final testament to his pathetic, undying devotion to her. And his last act on this earth was to ensure my complete and utter ruin. The lawyer's dry, condescending voice still echoed in my skull. As per Mr. Thornfield's last will and testament, his entire estate, including all controlling shares in Thornfield Technologies, are bequeathed to the unborn child of Ms. Isolde Devereux. I could still see the smirk Isolde tried to hide behind a handkerchief. That unborn child was a convenient fiction. A loophole Leo had clutched at to gift everything to his white moonlight. I, his wife, the one who'd worked beside him, who'd mortgaged my own family's goodwill to fund his first prototypes, was left with nothing. Less than nothing. Debts he'd hidden. A hollow title. And now I was an employee. A senior project manager reporting to Isolde who knew nothing about tech, nothing about business, only about spending money and looking fragile. She'd made me her personal assistant, her errand girl, forcing me to fetch her coffee while she signed documents that should have had my name on them. The humiliation was a physical weight crushing my lungs. I stood on the ledge, my own reflection a ghost in the dark glass of the building opposite. This was it. The final, fitting end to the story of Alara Vance, the greatest fool who ever lived. I'd traded my birthright for a lie of love, and the lie had consumed me. I closed my eyes, ready to step into the void. But I didn't fall. I opened my eyes to soft, morning light filtering through a delicate pink canopy. The air smelled of lavender and beeswax, a scent from my childhood. I was lying in a vast four-poster bed, the mattress impossibly soft beneath me. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with despair, but with a disorienting, terrifying shock. This was my old room. My parents' estate. The room I'd left behind when I'd chosen Leo, when I'd turned my back on all of this. I pushed myself up, my hands sinking into the plush duvet. My hands. They were smoother, younger, without the calluses from years of grinding work. I looked around, my breath catching in my throat. Everything was pristine, untouched by the years of struggle and decay that had defined my life with Leo. Photographs of me from university smiled from the dresser. A stack of leather-bound books sat neatly on the nightstand. A gentle knock sounded at the door before it swung open. My mother, Eleanor Vance, stood there. She looked younger, her face less lined with the worry I'd later put there. Her posture was as impeccable as ever, her silk dressing gown tied neatly at her waist. Her expression was a mask of calm exasperation. "You're awake," she said, her voice cool and familiar. She walked into the room and stood by the bed looking down at me. "I need to ask you one more time, Alara, and I expect a serious answer. Are you truly certain you wish to marry that man?" Callan Weaver. The name hit me like a physical blow. Callan Weaver. Before he'd decided, Leo Thornfield sounded more impressive. Before the ambition had curdled into something dark. This was the day. The day after he'd proposed with a cheap ring and grand, empty promises. The day I'd thrown my life away. My mother continued, her tone laced with a disdain she'd never been able to fully hide. "He has no prospects to speak of. His family name is a ghost of what it was. He brings you nothing but pretty words and poverty. Is that truly what you want?" In my first life, her words had felt like an attack. I'd seen her as a snob, a cold-hearted aristocrat who couldn't understand true love. I'd fought her with every ounce of my teenage rebellion, cementing my resolve to prove her wrong. Now I heard the raw, desperate concern underneath the polished veneer. She was trying to save me. And I had been too much of a fool to listen. The memories of my other life, my real life, flooded me. The years of scraping by while Callan chased his big break. The way his family, the Weavers, had looked down on me even as they spent my money. The slow, chilling realization that his heart had always belonged to Isolde, his childhood friend, his delicate, untouchable muse. His white moonlight. I saw his cold eyes the day he'd signed the will. I felt the sting of Isolde's condescending smile as she took my seat at the head of the boardroom table. A fire ignited in my chest, burning away the last of the numbness. It wasn't despair. It was rage. A pure, undiluted fury so potent it made my hands shake. I lunged forward, throwing myself off the bed and onto my knees on the thick Persian rug. I didn't have to fake the hysterical edge in my voice. The horror was real. No. I cried out, the word tearing from a place of deep, ancient pain. No, mother, I don't. I won't marry him. I won't marry a pathetic, worthless loser like Kalen Weaver. I was insane. I must have been out of my mind. The words hung in the air, stark and shocking. I saw my mother's perfect composure break for a single glorious second. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. The stern line of her mouth softened into something like stunned relief. It was the reaction she'd been praying for but never expected to get. She recovered quickly, the elegant matriarch once more, but a new light was in her eyes. She stepped forward and placed a cool hand on my trembling shoulder. There now, she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. That's more like my daughter. The way you've been acting. I was convinced you were under some sort of spell. She patted my shoulder, a rare gesture of affection. The Weavers are waiting downstairs in the sunroom. They're eager to discuss the future. Her lip curled ever so slightly. Since you've come to your senses, I will go down and make our position clear. This farce ends now. She turned to leave, ready to dispatch the social climbers with her trademark icy precision. But a new thought, cold and sharp, stopped me. Letting them go was too easy. Too clean. Kalen would slink away, find some other wealthy girl to leech from, and perhaps still find his way to Isolde. The betrayal of my first life, a life that felt both years ago and minutes ago, demanded more. It demanded payment. Wait, mother, I said, my voice suddenly steady. She paused, one hand on the doorframe, and looked back at me. This mess is of my making, I said, a plan forming in my mind with terrifying clarity. Let me handle it. I'm the one who led them on. I should be the one to send them away. A flicker of concern crossed her face. Elara, you don't have to subject yourself to that. I want to, I said, and the smile that touched my lips felt foreign and dangerous. I insist. I walked to my wardrobe, my movements sure and purposeful. I bypassed the youthful, brightly colored dresses I'd favored back then and went straight to the back. There hung a dress I'd always loved but never worn, deeming it too severe for a girl of 22. A black cheapao of raw silk, embroidered with barely visible dark gold lotus flowers along the high collar and slit skirt. It was dignified, elegant, and spoke of an authority I had yet to grow into. I put it on. I sat at my vanity and carefully applied makeup, not to enhance a youthful glow, but to sculpt a face of unassailable composure. I swept my hair into a low, sleek chignon and selected a pair of jade drop earrings that had been my grandmother's. The final touch was a heavy imperial green jade ring I slid onto my middle finger. When I turned to face my mother, she was watching me, a complex emotion in her eyes, surprise, pride, and a dawning understanding that her daughter had changed in some fundamental way overnight. Well, she said, a slow smile gracing her lips. Shall we go and evict the parasites? Together we walked down the grand staircase. The air in the Vance home was different now, charged with my newfound resolve. We approached the sunroom, its doors standing open. From the hallway I could see them. Mr. Weaver, a man whose once handsome face had been eroded by failure and drink, was leaning forward in his chair, talking animatedly to my father, Alistair Vance. My father sat upright in his wingback chair, his expression stern and unyielding, a king tolerating a court jester. He wasn't even pretending to be interested. And then I saw them. Kalen and Isolde. Kalen was heartbreakingly young, his dark hair falling over his forehead, his eyes already holding that familiar mix of ambition and resentment. He wore a blue shirt so faded it was almost white. And next to him, clinging to his arm like a delicate vine, was Isolde, the white moonlight herself. Even as the family's adopted daughter, she was here, playing the supportive sister, her large eyes taking in the opulence of our home with a poorly disguised hunger. The Weavers had fallen on hard times, forced into a cramped apartment that smelled of mildew and lost dreams. Mr. Weaver burned through their last pennies on schemes to restore their glory. It showed in their clothes, in their postures. They were moths drawn to the Vance fortune's flame. And I was the one who was about to snuff it out. I paused at the threshold, letting them see me. Mr. Weaver noticed me first, his face instantly transforming into a sycophantic mask of delight. Elara. My dear girl, there you are. Come in, come in. Look at you, such grace, such elegance. Anyone can see you and Kaelin are a perfect match. He gushed as if the marriage were a foregone conclusion. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I simply let my gaze travel over them, cold and assessing. I saw Kaelin's brow furrow slightly, confused by my demeanor. I saw the flash of pure, unadulterated jealousy in Isolde's eyes before she quickly hid it behind a demure smile. I walked into the room, the silk of my dress whispering against the floor. I took a seat opposite Kaelin, crossing my legs slowly. I touched the jade ring on my finger, a gesture of casual ownership. Mr. Weaver, oblivious, was already turning back to my father. Now, Alistair, about the details of the the marriage. The dowry tradition is so important, a way to ensure our Alara's comfort, of course. I raised my hand. The movement was small, but it silenced him instantly. Mr. Weaver, I said, my voice cold and clear as cut glass. I haven't yet agreed to marry Kaelin. Perhaps you should hold off on calculating the price of the horse before you've even won the race. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the Persian rug. Kaelin's face flushed a dark red. He leaned forward, his voice tight with affronted dignity. Alara Vance. How dare you speak to my father that way? Apologize. Now. I turned my head slowly to look at him. I gave him a slow, scornful once-over from his worn-out shoes to his entitled scowl. A cold smile played on my lips. And who, exactly, do you think you are to be giving me orders, Kaelin? I asked, my tone dangerously soft. My family has funded your education, your lifestyle, your very existence for years. I practically raised you from the gutter. And now you, a freeloader with nothing to his name but audacity, demand an apology from me? You have nerve. I'll give you that. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father. His stern expression had softened. He subtly shifted in his chair, a quiet, profound satisfaction settling over him. He'd always hated this match, hated their grasping nature, but was too much of a gentleman to say so. I was saying it for him. I was giving voice to the truth he'd been forced to politely ignore. The Weaver family was stunned into silence. I pressed my advantage, my finger jabbing toward Kaelin. If it weren't for my family's money, you'd have dropped out of university years ago. You'd be flipping burgers on a street corner, not dreaming of startups. It was an honor that I even glanced in your direction. And you dare raise your voice to me. Then I shifted my gaze, letting it land pointedly on Isolde, who was standing silently by Kaelin's side, playing the innocent. Or is the problem that your heart is already occupied elsewhere? I asked, my voice dripping with false sweetness. And I'm just the inconvenient obstacle to your epic, poverty-stricken love story? Isolde's face went as white as her nickname. Her lips trembled. Not long ago, Mr. Weaver, desperate for cash, had tried to marry her off to a rheumy-eyed old financier in exchange for a business loan. It was only Kaelin's sudden proposal to me, the rich girl next door, that had saved her from that fate. I could see the memory of that humiliation in her eyes, and I reveled in it. Alara, that's enough, Kaelin snapped, his voice strained. Isolde and I are like siblings. Don't be disgusting. The corner of my mouth curled. His defense was so weak, so transparent. It was as good as a confession. My father, a man who had built his fortune on reading people, saw it too. His eyes narrowed, shifting between Kaelin's defensive posture and Isolde's pale guilt. The pieces clicked into place. His face darkened with a cold, controlled fury. He looked at Mr. Weaver and let out a short, humorless laugh. The ancients said a man should govern his household before he can govern a nation, my father said, his voice like ice. Your family can't even manage its own affairs, Weaver. No wonder your business collapsed. He turned to the house manager standing discreetly by the door. A family like this believes they're worthy of the Vances? He said, his voice rising for the first time. It's a joke. Remove them. Now. The scene that followed was a beautiful, chaotic mess of protestations and indignity. The Weaver family was unceremoniously ushered out of our home by our staff. I walked calmly to the large window overlooking the driveway. I watched them stand there on the pristine gravel, a huddled group of failure and rage. Kaelin looked up, his eyes searching the windows until they found mine. His expression was a storm of hatred and confusion. I didn't look away. I held his gaze and then, slowly, deliberately, I raised my hand and extended my middle finger. The look of sheer, uncomprehending fury on his face was the first true satisfaction I'd felt in 2 lifetimes. The security gates began to close and the property manager's car pulled up, ready to escort them off the premises for good. It was over. I was free of him. But as I turned from the window, a cold certainty settled in my stomach. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Kalen Weaver had taken everything from me once. In this life I would return the favor. I would dismantle his life piece by piece and I would enjoy every single second of it. The game was on. And this time I knew all the rules. The silence in the sunroom after the Weaver's expulsion was profound, broken only by the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. The air, once thick with their desperate energy, now felt clean and still. My father, Alistair, turned to me. The stern mask had melted away, replaced by a look of bewildered pride. "Ilara," he began, his voice a low rumble. "I must admit I wasn't expecting that." My mother, Eleanor, glided over to me, her hand resting on my arm. "It was rather spectacularly done, darling. Brutal but necessary. I was beginning to think we'd lost you to some peculiar form of madness." She studied my face, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "What brought this on? Last night you were ready to pawn the family silver for that boy." I couldn't tell them the truth. That I'd lived a decade of misery and died on a rooftop. They'd have me committed. I opted for a version of it. "I had a nightmare," I said, my voice quiet but steady. I looked out the window where their car had disappeared. A very long, very vivid nightmare. I saw where that path led. To nothing but disrespect, poverty, and betrayal. I met my father's gaze. I saw him for what he is. A social climber with a heart belonging to someone else. I will not be his stepping stone. My father nodded slowly, a deep satisfaction settling into his features. "Good. It's a lesson better learned in a dream than in life." He cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have sheltered you perhaps too much. It made you vulnerable to pretty words and pathetic schemes. That ends today." A thrill, sharp and electric, shot through me. This was new. In my first life, after I'd defiantly married Kalen, my parents had distanced themselves, heartbroken but resolute in their refusal to enable my mistake. They'd cut off my trust fund, leaving me to survive on Kalen's non-existent income. This was the opposite. "Starting Monday," my father continued, his tone leaving no room for argument, "you will come to work with me at Vance International. It's time you learned the family business from the ground up. No more gallery openings and charity luncheons. It's time for board meetings and balance sheets." This was more than I could have hoped for. In my previous life I'd built my own company from scratch alongside Kalen, learning everything the hard way through failure and debt. Now I was being handed the keys to a kingdom. The knowledge I possessed, the experience of running a startup, the foresight of market trends, combined with the immense resources of Vance International, it was a terrifyingly powerful combination. "I'd like that, Father," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you." My mother squeezed my arm. "We'll have to update your wardrobe. Power suits, not party dresses." Just then my phone buzzed on the side table. A series of rapid, insistent vibrations. I picked it up. It was a string of messages from Serafina Sarah Song. "Sarah, Ilara. What is this I hear? Someone told me you broke things off with Kalen? Sarah, is this a joke? You can't be serious. Sarah, he's gorgeous, he's ambitious, he's perfect for you. You're not getting any younger, you know. You should be grateful a man like that even looked your way. Sarah, and now you're throwing it away? Face with rolling eyes, face with rolling eyes, face with rolling eyes. Sarah, if you're really this stupid, then we're done. Don't ever talk to me again." I stared at the screen, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Sarah Song. My best friend. The illegitimate daughter of the powerful Song family, always scrambling for status, always trying to elevate herself by association. In my first life she had been my most ardent supporter of the relationship with Kalen. She'd been the one to soothe my doubts, to tell me I was being paranoid about Isolde, to push me toward the altar. And when everything fell apart, when Isolde came to seize my company, Sarah had vanished. I later discovered she'd taken a hefty consulting fee from the Weavers and immigrated to a non-extradition country. She'd been a plant. A paid influencer in my own social circle, tasked with ensuring I walked willingly to my own financial slaughter. Looking at her messages now, The manipulation was so blatant I felt like a fool for ever falling for it. You're not getting any younger. Be grateful. The audacity. I was 22 and the heir to a multimillion-dollar empire. A white-hot anger flared within me. In my past life, pampered and protected, I'd been a soft-edged, naive socialite. It was only after years of hardship with Kaylin that I'd grown a spine and sharpened my claws, becoming the woman they called President Vance. That woman was in charge now. Without a second thought, I opened Sarah's contact, hit block, and deleted the conversation. The action was swift and final. I felt a surge of visceral satisfaction. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The following Saturday was the annual summer gala at the Orion Museum, one of the biggest social events of the season. It was a place to see and be seen, for old money to reaffirm its status and for new money to desperately try and buy some. I attended with my parents, my black cheapao traded for a floor-length gown of sapphire blue velvet that screamed of quiet, unassailable wealth. I was near the champagne fountain, engaged in a polite but dull conversation with the daughter of a shipping magnate, when I felt a presence at my elbow. "Elara. We need to talk." I turned. Sarah stood there, her face flushed with anger and cheap champagne. She was dressed in a knockoff version of a designer gown, the seams straining. She had clearly drunk enough liquid courage to confront me. "How dare you block me?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "After everything I've done for you? I was your only real friend. Explain yourself." The crowd around us stilled, eager eyes flicking our way. Drama was always the best entertainment. The legitimate Song daughter I'd been speaking with, Lillian, frowned deeply. The Song family was currently in delicate negotiations with Vance International over a joint venture. Lillian had been nothing but impeccably polite and deferential to me. Now this illegitimate half-sister was causing a scene. Unthinkable. "Sarah," Lillian said, her voice icy. "Who gave you the right to speak to Miss Vance in that tone? This is a formal event, not a street market. If she blocked you, I'm certain she had an excellent reason. Perhaps you should look inward." Sarah opened her mouth to retort, but I cut her off. My voice was calm, cold, and carried perfectly in the sudden hush. "I'd like to ask you the same question, Miss Song," I said, putting a subtle, mocking emphasis on the name. "I assume the Song family's upbringing isn't entirely lacking. So how did you turn out like this? You actually had the gall to suggest that I, Elara Vance, should be grateful that a man like Kaylin Weaver, a man from a bankrupt family with nothing to offer but debt and delusions, would consider marrying me?" A few gasps sounded around us. I saw Lillian's face pale. "You were so invested, Sarah," I continued, my tone one of detached curiosity. "When I had a simple argument with him, you told me you'd cut ties with me if I didn't apologize. Such passion. Such concern for a relationship that had absolutely nothing to do with you. It makes one wonder what your real interest was." The crowd tittered. The subtext was clear to everyone. She'd been paid. The illusion of her friendship shattered in front of the entire elite of the city. Lillian's face was a mask of fury and humiliation. She didn't even look at Sarah. She simply glanced at her head of security, a large man standing a few feet away, and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The man stepped forward. There was no discussion, no warning. He slapped Sarah twice across the face, the sound cracking through the air like gunshots. The force of it sent her stumbling back into a waiter, sending a tray of crystal flutes crashing to the floor. Lillian turned to me, her expression now one of contrite apology. "Miss Vance, please accept my deepest apologies. This is entirely the Song family's fault for poor discipline. What a disgrace. Rest assured we will take her home and deal with this matter appropriately." I looked at Sarah, holding a hand to her red, swelling cheek, tears of shock and shame streaming down her face as two other staff members grabbed her arms. I recalled how smug and untouchable she'd been in my last life, always whispering poison in my ear. Now she was just a drag-out piece of trash. I gave Lillian a slight, regal nod. "See that you do." As Sarah was unceremoniously hauled away, I turned back to Lillian. "Now where were we? I believe you were mentioning the potential export tariffs in the Southeast Asian market." The following Monday I walked into Vance International for the first time. The headquarters was a sleek glass tower in the heart of the financial district, a monument to my family's power. My father, true to his word, installed me as his personal assistant. For a week I was his shadow. I followed him from dawn to dusk, from high-level board strategy sessions to tedious operational reviews. I absorbed everything. The company was a well-oiled machine. Unlike many family empires riddled with internal politics, my parents ran a tight ship. They shared power equally, and their respect for competence trickled down through every department. It was a revelation compared to the chaotic, backstabbing startup environment I'd endured with Kalen. And thanks to that very experience, I understood it all instantly. The jargon, the financial models, the market analyses. It was a language I was already fluent in. I could see the gears turning, the subtle leverages, the potential pitfalls. My father watched me, his initial cautious supervision giving way to genuine surprise and eventually to impressed approval. By the end of the week, he called me into his office, a corner suite with a breathtaking view of the city. "I had planned to keep you by my side for a year, perhaps two," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It seems I underestimated you. The reports you compiled on the European subsidiary were sharper than those from my senior analysts." He stood up and walked to the window. "This company will be yours one day. No point in delaying the inevitable." He turned to face me. "Effective immediately, you're promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development. Your mother agrees. Don't make us regret it." The following afternoon, as I was settling into my new cavernous office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my cousin Celeste. "Celeste, you are not going to believe who I just saw playing courtesan at the Halcyon Hotel Investor Mixer. Your ex's sister. Dress barely on. You have to come to the Rutherford thing this weekend. It's going to be a bloodbath and you have a front row seat." Smiling face with horns. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. Celeste was a firecracker, a sharp-tongued heiress with a vicious streak and a long-standing bitter feud with Isolde. Years ago, when they were both teenagers trying to break into the same elite social circle, Isolde had made it her mission to destroy Celeste's reputation with a campaign of vicious lies and backstabbing. Celeste had never forgotten and never forgiven. It seemed the Weaver situation was growing dire. Without me, the walking ATM, Mr. Weaver was getting desperate. And he was pushing his only other viable asset forward. Isolde. The thought of watching the proud, ethereal white moonlight debase herself for money stirred a dark, gleeful anticipation in my heart. I was not a saint. I was not turning the other cheek. I was the kind of woman who enjoyed kicking my enemies when they were down. And I was going to enjoy this immensely. Send me the details. I'll be there. I spent the next day preparing. I called in a favor from a couture designer and acquired a gown that had just walked the runway in Paris. It was a masterpiece of blood-red silk and black lace, cut to accentuate every curve and designed to intimidate. I paired it with diamonds so cold they could cut glass. That night, when I stepped out of the limousine onto the red carpet at the Rutherford Foundation banquet, I wasn't just attending a party. I was making a statement. I was declaring war. Camera flashes exploded around me. The minor starlets and B-list celebrities posing nearby instantly faded into obscurity. I was the story. I heard a young reporter whisper to his colleague, "Who is that?" His colleague, older and wiser, hushed him. "That's the real deal. Old money. Over half the A-listers here are signed to her family's entertainment subsidiary. Show some respect." The director of the foundation, an old family friend, personally came to escort me inside. "Alara, my dear, you look stunning. The place is buzzing about the Vance heir finally taking her place in the company." I smiled graciously. "Just here to support the arts, Charles." As we entered the glittering hall, a hush fell momentarily before the chatter resumed at a higher, more excited pitch. I spotted Celeste near the buffet table and made my way over. "Finally," she said, her eyes sparkling with malice. "I was beginning to think you'd gone soft. Ready for the show?" "I brought popcorn," I deadpanned, picking up a glass of champagne. We didn't have to wait long. The main event wasn't down here with the glitterati. It was upstairs in the private suites where the real business, the dirty, lucrative, unspoken business, took place. After the public-facing portion of the evening wound down, a select group began to drift towards the elevators. POs, directors, a few top-tier celebrities and their companions. Celeste and I exchanged a glance and followed. The atmosphere on the top floor was a different world. It was a zoo where everyone had finally taken off their masks. Greed was the only currency. Powerful men held court, surrounded by sycophants and a rotating cast of beautiful young things vying for their attention. And there, in the middle of it all, was Isolde. She was a vision of pathetic desperation. The online persona she cultivated, the self-made, empowered, chaste dancer devoted to her art, was nowhere to be seen. Here she was draped in a cheap sequin dress that left little to the imagination. Leaning against a paunchy, red-faced man in his 50s I recognized as Silas Croft, a notoriously lecherous investor who'd made his fortune in dubious mining ventures. She was laughing too loudly at his jokes, her hand resting on his arm, her body angled toward him in a parody of seduction. Every so often she'd throw her head back and let out a shrill, deliberate giggle that made my skin crawl. Celeste made a gagging motion behind her napkin. I think I'm going to be sick. Look at her. She's like a discount call girl. I just watched, my eyes cold. This was the woman Kalen loved so desperately he'd willed her his fortune. This was his untouchable angel. She was nothing but a common gold digger. We found a shadowed booth and listened. And your wife just doesn't understand you, Uncle Silas. Isolde was simpering, her voice a sugary falsetto. She's so cold. A powerful man like you needs warmth, appreciation. Croft grunted, his eyes already wandering to a stunning actress across the room. Isolde pouted, and squeezed his arm. Don't look at her, Uncle Silas. Her body's nowhere near as good as mine. I'm a dancer, you know. I'm very flexible. That was it for Celeste. She choked on her champagne. I just smiled, a thin, cruel curve of my lips. I pulled out my phone and, under the table, began to record a short, clear video. The audio was pristine. Her giggling, her insults to his wife, her pathetic attempts to sell herself. The party dragged on. Eventually, Croft stood up, patting his distended stomach. He said something low into Isolde's ear. Her eyes widened slightly, then she nodded, a nervous but determined look on her face. He gestured toward the door. They were leaving. Together. My heart beat a steady, thrilling rhythm. The hunt was on. I smiled faintly and sent a single prearranged text message to my assistant. Orchid Sweet. No. Then I stood up. Come on, Celeste. The night is still young. And the show's moving to a hotel? She guessed, her eyes wide with excitement. I linked my arm with hers. Oh yes. And I've arranged for a very special guest to make an appearance. The limousine ride to the hotel was a silent, charged thing. Celeste vibrated with gleeful anticipation beside me, while I sat perfectly still, my mind a calm, focused engine. I watched the city lights streak past the tinted windows, each one a pinpoint in the web I was spinning. The Halcyon Hotel was one of ours. A Vance International property. Its opulent, silent lobby was a temple to discretion, and every staff member knew my face. As we glided through, the manager, a man named Mr. Evans whose composure was legendary, gave me the most imperceptible of nods. Everything was in place. We didn't go to the main desk. We were ushered directly into a private elevator that opened into the hotel's exclusive VIP lounge. It was empty, save for a single attendant who placed a pot of jasmine tea and 2 cups on the low table before vanishing. Okay, spill, Celeste whispered, sinking into a plush velvet sofa. What's the play? I saw you texting. I poured the tea, the fragrant steam rising between us. Silas Croft is a pig, but he's a predictable pig. He always books the same suite here when he's entertaining. The Orchid Suite. Room 2212. And Isolde is on her way up there right now, Celeste said, her eyes wide. To become a woman. To secure an investment for the Weaver family, I corrected, my voice dry. Mr. Weaver is desperate. He's convinced himself he's discovered the next big thing in biodegradable plastics. It requires a capital injection he doesn't have. And since Kalen has been busy using his own meager earnings to pay off his father's old gambling debts, there's no money left in the Weaver coffers. Isolde has grown tired of living in a 2-bedroom apartment that smells of stale ambition. This was the logical next step for them. I took a sip of tea. It was perfect. They were just in too much of a hurry. They didn't do their homework. Homework. Celeste leaned forward. On Mr. Croft. I set my cup down. The man is a walking corporate liability. He didn't build his fortune, he married into it. His wife Helena comes from old mining money. She's the one with the real power, and she's notoriously ruthless about protecting her family's name and assets. especially from the distractions her husband accumulates. A slow, dawning smile spread across Celeste's face. No. Oh yes. I checked the delicate diamond watch on my wrist. According to a very reliable tip I may have anonymously leaked about 30 minutes ago, a furious Mrs. Croft is currently en route to this hotel with a few of her associates. She should be arriving in about 20 minutes. Celeste let out a low whistle. You're evil. I love it. But that's just the opening act, I said, standing up. The main event requires a change of costume. I slipped into a private adjoining room. Hanging on the back of the door was a uniform. A crisp white blouse, black tailored trousers, and a halcyon hotel blazer. I changed quickly, pinning a name badge to the lapel. Smith, floor manager. Next to it I fastened a small, elegant brooch. To anyone else it was a simple piece of jewelry. In reality, it housed a tiny high-resolution pinhole camera. I wasn't going to miss a single second of this. When I emerged, Celeste gawked. You're going in there? I'm going to observe, I said calmly. A good general surveys the battlefield. We didn't have to wait long. Almost exactly 20 minutes later, the discreet phone on the lounge wall buzzed. Mr. Evans picked it up. He listened for a moment, his face a mask of professional concern. Thank you, Maria. I'll handle it. He hung up and turned to me. Ms. Vance. A group, led by a Mrs. Helena Croft, has just forced their way into the Orchid Suite using a master key. It seems volatile. Perfect, I said softly. Let's go. Mr. Evans, Celeste, and I took the service elevator to the 22nd floor. The doors hadn't even fully opened before the sounds hit us. A cacophony of shrieking, sobbing, and the sharp, unmistakable crack of a slap echoing down the plush, soundproofed hallway. You filthy little tramp. You think you can sink your claws into my husband? Into my family's money? We rounded the corner. The scene was a masterpiece of chaos. The door to 2212 was wide open. Helena Croft, a woman built like a battleship and dressed in a couture suit that probably cost more than the weaver's apartment, had a handful of Isolde's hair. Isolde was on her knees, clad only in a ridiculously sheer negligee, trying to cover herself. Her face was already bright red on one side. Silas Croft cowered in the background, wrapped in a bedsheet, his face pale with terror. Young and already selling yourself. Helena shrieked, yanking Isolde's head back. I'm going to make an example of you tonight. Someone. Hold her still. Let's see how pretty she is with a new smile. One of Helena's hulking bodyguards stepped forward and grabbed Isolde by the jaw, forcing her face up. Isolde's eyes were wild with animal fear, her makeup streaked with tears. I stood back near a potted fern, my arms crossed. Mr. Evans hovered nearby, the picture of a concerned hotel manager. I made sure the brooch on my lapel had a clear sightline. The bodyguard didn't use a knife. He used a key, dragging the sharp edge down Isolde's cheek once, then twice. Deep, cruel scratches that immediately welled with blood. Isolde screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, and collapsed onto the expensive carpet, clutching her face. A cold, serene satisfaction settled over me. This was justice. This was payment for every condescending smile, every stolen dream. But it wasn't enough. My eyes flicked to the door of the suite next door, 2213. I knew from the file my assistant had prepared that Kalen was in that room. He was meeting a potential investor from out of town, trying to pitch his own pathetic startup idea. The soundproofing in the halcyon was excellent, but no barrier was perfect against a scream like that. I gave Mr. Evans a tiny, almost imperceptible signal. He immediately understood, wringing his hands as he pushed his way through the small crowd of horrified hotel staff that had gathered. "Ma'am, please, I must insist," he said, his voice a panicked murmur meant to be overheard. As he passed room 2213, he subtly brushed his master key against the electronic lock. A faint green light flashed. The door was now unlatched, sitting slightly ajar. "There are too many eyes on this floor," Evans pleaded with Helena Croft. "You can't stay long. In 10 minutes we'll have to call an ambulance. We'll say a guest fainted from low blood sugar and scratched her face on a fallen earring. But you and your people need to conclude your business quickly." Helena Croft, flushed with vindictive power, nodded her approval. 10 minutes. Her gaze returned to the sobbing heap on the floor. Plenty of time. The next 10 minutes were a symphony of violence. Isolde's screams became the rhythm section. The bodyguard wasn't gentle. He yanked out a handful of her perfectly highlighted hair. The sound was horribly distinct. It was that particular sound, a ripping, screeching tear, that finally pierced the door of room 2213. The door swung open. Kalen stood there, his hair disheveled, his face a mask of annoyed exhaustion. He was wearing a hotel bathrobe. He'd clearly been interrupted while preparing for bed. "What in God's name is all this?" he began, his voice tight with irritation. And then he stopped. He heard a voice he knew. "Please, no more. I'm sorry. I didn't know he was married." Isolde wailed. His eyes scanned the hallway, past the manager, past the bodyguards, and landed on the bloody, half-naked figure on the floor. His face went through a rapid series of transformations. Confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. "Isolde." At the sound of his voice, Isolde's head snapped up. Through the blood and tears, her eyes locked onto his. They were wide with a desperate, pathetic hope. "Kalen. Kalen, help me. Please." I watched him, my breath held. This was the moment. Would he play the hero? Would he charge in to save his damsel in distress? His business partner, a man I recognized as a venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, emerged from their room behind him, his mouth agape at the scene. "By God, Weaver. Is that your sister?" The word, sister, seemed to snap something in Kalen. I saw it happen. The horror in his eyes was replaced by something else. Calculation. Panic. The need for self-preservation. He was standing in a hallway with a powerful investor, watching the girl he publicly called his sister being beaten for sleeping with a married man. His image, his carefully constructed narrative of being a respectable, wronged aristocrat, it was all about to shatter. He clenched his jaw. His face hardened into a mask of cold disgust. "My sister," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "is a respectable woman. She would never debase herself by becoming some paid mistress. Are you trying to insult me?" He looked at his stunned business partner, clapped a hand on his shoulder, and forced a grimace that was probably supposed to be a smile. "Some people have no shame. Let's not let this spectacle ruin our discussion. The numbers on that Series B funding are far more interesting." And with that, he turned his back on Isolde's shattered, disbelieving face. He walked back into his hotel room and closed the door. The soft, definitive click of the latch was louder than any scream. The hope in Isolde's eyes died. It was extinguished completely, replaced by a hollow, absolute emptiness. She stopped fighting. She just lay there taking the blows. I felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated triumph. He'd chosen himself. He'd always choose himself. He had just shown me and Isolde his true worthless heart. Helena Croft, seeing the fight go out of her victim, seemed to lose interest. "Break her legs," she said dismissively to the bodyguard as if ordering a coffee. "She won't be dancing for anyone ever again." The bodyguard didn't hesitate. He raised a thick, hard-sided briefcase and brought it down with brutal force on Isolde's shins. The sound was a sickening wet crack. Isolde didn't even scream this time. She just made a small, choked gasp before her eyes rolled back in her head and she passed out. The hallway fell silent. "Well," Helena Croft said, straightening her jacket. "That was invigorating." She nodded to Mr. Evans. "You can call your ambulance now." As her entourage swept away down the hall, I stepped forward. I looked down at the broken thing on the carpet. The white moonlight. Her face was a bloody ruin, her leg bent at a grotesque angle. "Call the ambulance," I said to Mr. Evans, my voice devoid of all emotion. "And make sure the entire bill is sent directly to the Weaver residence." I pulled out my phone and took 2 clear clinical photos of Isolde's unconscious form. Then I sent them to Celeste with a single line of text. "A thing of beauty is a joy forever." I turned and walked away, the uniform suddenly feeling constricting. The show was over. I had what I came for. The footage in my brooch was a weapon. Kalen's betrayal was a confirmation. And Isolde was finished. As I rode the elevator down, a calm certainty settled over me. This wasn't revenge. This was pest control. And I was just getting started. The game was evolving. And I was always 2 moves ahead. The silence in my new office was a palpable thing, broken only by the hum of the climate control system and the distant, muffled sounds of the city 20 floors below. My office. Vice President of Strategic Development. The title felt both alien and perfectly right, a skin I had been meant to grow into all along. The photos of Isolde's broken body were still seared onto the back of my eyelids. The memory of Kaylin's cold, calculating betrayal was a sweet, cold stone in my gut. But sentiment was a luxury I could not afford. It was Monday morning. The weekend's entertainment was over. Now it was time for business. My intercom buzzed. "Ms. Vance? Mr. Croft's representative is here for the bid meeting. They're in conference room B." A slow smile touched my lips. Silas Croft himself was conspicuously absent. No doubt licking his wounds and dealing with the fallout from his furious wife. He'd sent an underling to do his dirty work. "Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Inform the committee I'll be right there." I stood and smoothed down the lines of my tailored navy blazer. I picked up the folder on my desk. Our proposal for the joint development of a new sustainable data center. It was a masterpiece of strategy, financial modeling, and technical innovation. My team had worked on it for weeks, and I had poured every ounce of my future knowledge into its pages, anticipating market shifts and regulatory changes years before anyone else would. I walked into conference room B. The long mahogany table was surrounded by my team and the stern-faced members of the review committee. At the far end, sitting alone and looking profoundly out of his depth, was a nervous young man in an ill-fitting suit. Croft's representative. He stood up too quickly, fumbling with his own much thinner folder. "Ms. Vance? I'm Jeremy from Croft Holdings. Mr. Croft sends his regrets. He was, unexpectedly detained." "I'm sure he was," I said, my voice cool and pleasant as I took my seat at the head of the table. "Shall we begin?" The meeting was a slaughter. Jeremy stammered through a disorganized, vague presentation that was clearly thrown together at the last minute. He talked in buzzwords and empty promises, his slides filled with outdated statistics and wildly optimistic projections. The committee members shifted in their seats, their expressions growing more and more dismissive. When it was my turn, I didn't even need to look at my notes. I laid out our proposal with a calm, surgical precision. I spoke about energy efficiency metrics, infrastructure scalability, 5-year ROI projections, and risk mitigation strategies with an authority that left no room for doubt. I answered every skeptical question from the committee before it was even fully asked. I was not just presenting a proposal, I was conducting a masterclass. The result was a foregone conclusion. The committee head didn't even need to confer with his colleagues. "The decision is unanimous," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Vance International's proposal is clearly superior in every measurable aspect. The project is yours, Ms. Vance. Congratulations." Jeremy's face was ashen. He gathered his pathetic papers, his hands shaking. As the room emptied, he shot me a look of pure, bitter venom. "You think you're so clever," he hissed under his breath, the sycophantic mask finally slipping. "The younger generation has no respect. You just waltz in and take what you want." I paused, turning back to him with a mild, almost pitying expression. I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Well, Jeremy," I said, my smile never wavering, "I do have a rather compelling video of your boss being caught in a compromising position with a young woman who isn't his wife. It really highlights his lack of discretion. I suppose that does make me something, doesn't it?" His jaw dropped. All the color drained from his face, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He stumbled back as if I'd struck him, then turned and almost ran from the room, clutching his folder like a life preserver. Later that afternoon, I recounted the incident to my father in his office. He listened, steepling his fingers, a deep frown on his face. "Alara," he said, his tone serious. "That was reckless." I blinked, surprised. He was disrespectful. I put him in his place. "You wielded a weapon you don't fully understand," he corrected me. "That filthy old cucumber, as your mother so eloquently put it, is in a world of trouble." It seems his little escapade came with more than just a black eye from his wife. The doctors found complications, unpleasant diseases. And now his children are moving in. It's a bloodbath over there. A messy, messy bloodbath. My eyes widened. I hadn't anticipated that. "What? My point is," he continued, his gaze intent, "that scandal happened in our hotel. If that video ever sees the light of day, we will be the first target of their wrath. Unless we are prepared to go to total war with what's left of the Croft Empire, and we are not, it's bad for business, then that video stays locked away. Use it to scare lackeys if you must. Use it to keep that girl in line. But do not, under any circumstances, use it against the family itself. Always leave your opponents a way out, Alara. Or you force them to fight with nothing to lose. He stood up and came around the desk, placing a hand on my shoulder. You were brilliant today. The way you handled that meeting, it was masterful. But remember, there is a vast difference between being shrewd and being ruthless. The former builds an empire. The latter usually burns it to the ground. You're still learning. I will teach you the rest. His words were a bucket of cold water. He was right. I'd been gloating, playing with fire. I nodded, the lesson etching itself into my mind. I understand, Father. The success of the data center project cemented my position within Vance International. At the next quarterly meeting, my father publicly praised my department, highlighting the record-breaking profitability we'd driven. The applause from the board members was genuine, their looks of respect newly earned. I was no longer just the boss's daughter. I was a force to be reckoned with. After the meeting, my father's assistant handed me a new file. From your father, Ms. Vance. He said you'd find it interesting. I opened it. It was a proposal for a massive citywide telecom infrastructure upgrade. A hugely lucrative project. And the point of contact for the primary contractor? Kalen Weaver. He'd landed a job as a senior executive at a rival firm, Telos Systems. It was a position far beyond his experience, no doubt secured through what was left of his family's name and a great deal of smooth talking. I looked up and saw my father watching me from across the hall. He gave me a small, cryptic smile and turned away. The message was clear. This was another test. He was handing me the knife. He wanted to see if I was still emotionally entangled enough to give Kalen the deal, or if I had the coldness to crush him. That evening, as if on cue, my personal phone buzzed. An unknown number. But I knew who it was. Unknown, Ilara. It's Kalen. We need to talk. About the Telos proposal. Meet me tomorrow? The usual place. 4 p.m. The usual place. A quaint, overpriced coffee shop near campus where we used to meet. Where he'd whisper his dreams to me and I'd pour my trust and my allowance into them. Rage hot and fresh boiled up inside me. The sheer, unmitigated gall of him. I didn't respond. I just made a note in my calendar. The following afternoon I dressed with deliberate care. Not in a power suit, but in understated, impossibly expensive cashmere and silk. I wore a watch that cost more than his car and carried a handbag that was a limited edition piece of art. I was not going to meet him as a fellow executive. I was going to meet him as Ilara Vance, heir to a fortune he could never even comprehend. I arrived early. I chose a table near the back but positioned myself so I could see the door. I ordered a tea and waited. He arrived with his old college roommate, Brian Chase. They were laughing, clapping each other on the back. They didn't see me at first. They took a table nearby, their voices carrying. Relax, man, Brian was saying, his voice a familiar, grating boom. It's Ilara. He was crazy about you. She'll definitely give you the deal. Worst case, just tell her if she doesn't, you won't get back together with her. That'll make her fall in line. I saw red. Pure, incandescent fury. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. The sound made them both look up. I picked up my teacup and my bag and walked over to their table. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Brian, then down at his cheap shoes, then back to his face. I let my expression convey everything. Utter, unvarnished contempt. His smirk vanished, replaced by confusion and then dawning horror as he took in my clothes, my bag, the sheer, unassailable aura of wealth and power that now clung to me. Well, Brian Chase, I said, my voice like ice. Still telling your friends how to manipulate women? How's that working out for you? Just yesterday your uncle was toasting me at the Metropolitan Club, begging me to go easy on your family's shipping contracts. And here you are playing tough guy. Do you really want to be the reason your entire company goes bankrupt? He paled, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I had him. His family's business was hanging by a thread and he knew I knew it. With him silenced, I turned my gaze to Kalen. I crossed my arms, not bothering to hide my disgust. So that's the play, Kalen? Send your lackey to soften me up? You want me to just hand over the Vance Telecom contract to you? After everything? How pathetically transparent. I glanced between the two of them, my smile a razor blade. Your faces are so red. You look like you've been slapped. Brian finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation. Fine. Don't give us the deal. But you don't have to be such a bitch about it. I laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. Such language, Brian. And from a man whose family is so desperate to climb the political ladder. I tilted my head. Kalen, here was even trying to marry off his beloved sister to you, wasn't he? You were so thrilled. The perfect little Weaver son-in-law. You're a solid catch, I'll give you that. Decent family, hardworking. They picked well. Kalen's face tightened. Alara, don't. I ignored him, my eyes locked on Brian. But tell me, Brian. How is dear Isolde? Have you seen her lately? I tapped my phone. The cafe had a small screen mounted on the wall for music videos. With a few swift commands, I mirrored my screen to it. The video from my brooch played in stark high-definition clarity. Isolde on her knees. The slap. The key scraping down her cheek. Her raw, screaming terror. The audio, crisp and horrifying, filled the quiet coffee shop. Brian stared, his face a slowly shifting painting of confusion, recognition, and dawning, sickening horror. She decided being a mistress was more profitable than being a sister, I said, my voice a calm, clinical narration over her screams. She got caught. Dragged out of a hotel room by the wife. Your best friend Kalen was in the room right next door. He heard the whole thing. Saw it even. And he chose to do nothing. He walked away and closed the door. Some brother, huh? Kalen shot to his feet. That's enough. Is it? I asked, my voice sweetening with false concern. I haven't even gotten to the best part, Brian. That wealthy businessman she was with? The one she was trying to seduce for money? He was recently diagnosed with a rather advanced case of syphilis. I let my eyes travel down Brian's body with deliberate slowness. Stage 3, I believe. So contagious. You're up next, aren't you? Weren't you and Isolde getting close? The blood drained from Brian's face so completely I thought he might pass out. He came from a staunchly conservative, politically ambitious family. He had just passed the bar exam and was days away from his mandatory health screening for a prestigious government clerkship. A sexually transmitted disease, especially one so notorious, would be an instant career-ending scandal. A stain that would never wash out. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I'd get tested, Brian. Immediately. Unless you want to explain to your father, the senator, why his son has to withdraw his application because of a little problem he caught from his best friend's sister. I straightened up, gave them both one last sweeping look of disgust and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The damage was done. 15 minutes later, the cafe owner called the police. There had been a violent altercation. One patron had apparently attacked another, beating him nearly senseless before being restrained. A few days later, the news trickled down through the social grapevine. Brian Chase had been found dead the night before his medical exam. An apparent suicide. The official story was pressure from his upcoming job. Everyone in our circle knew the truth. The Chase and Weaver families severed all ties. My father heard from a contact that Brian's older brother, the one being groomed for governor, had shown no emotion at the funeral. He just stood at the door, shaking hands with a grim, set jaw. In families like that, reputation was everything. Brian had become a liability and liabilities were removed. And as for the Weavers? Their troubles were only beginning. Because another piece of news soon followed. A deliciously tragic punchline to the whole sordid affair. Isolde was pregnant. Mr. Weaver, seeing one last desperate chance at a payday, dragged a bruised and broken Isolde to the Croft family mansion, demanding responsibility, demanding child support, demanding reparations. What he didn't know, what I had known from my father's discreet inquiries, was that Silas Croft had been rendered sterile in a boating accident over a decade ago. The child Isolde was carrying couldn't possibly be his. It could have been Kalen's. It could have been Brian's. It could have been any number of men's. The resulting scene on the Crofts' manicured lawn was one of utter, humiliating farce. The Croft children, now firmly in control, had their security guards literally hose the Weavers off their property, laughing as they did it. The story made the gossip rags. The Weaver name was not just bankrupt, it was a joke. I sat in my pristine office, looking out at the city I was slowly learning to command, and I allowed myself a single cold smile. The pawns were off the board. The first moves were complete. Kalen was isolated, his reputation in tatters, his family a public disgrace. His white moonlight was broken, disfigured, and carrying a bastard child of uncertain origin. The game was progressing beautifully. But I knew Kalen. He was a cockroach. He would survive. He would find a way to crawl back from this. And when he did, I would be waiting. The silence in my office after the news of Brian's suicide was profound, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the first volley, the air still thrumming with the echo of violence. I felt no triumph, only a cold, grim satisfaction. The pieces were falling exactly as I'd known they would. The Chase family had cut out the infected limb to save the body. It was a brutal, clinical act of self-preservation I could almost respect. My father's lesson echoed in my mind. Always leave your opponents a way out. Brian had been given no way out. I had systematically destroyed every escape route, backing him into a corner from which the only exit was a final, desperate act. It was ruthless. And it had worked. A part of me, the old Alara, might have been horrified. The new Alara, the one who had died on a rooftop, simply filed it away as data. A successful strategy. My focus shifted entirely to Vance International. The telecom infrastructure project was mine, and I attacked it with a ferocity that both impressed and alarmed my senior staff. I used knowledge I shouldn't have had: upcoming regulatory changes, emerging fiber optic technologies, the precise weaknesses of our competitors, to steer the project with an uncanny precision. Profits soared. My father's initial watchful caution evolved into something akin to awe. He began deferring to me in meetings, watching me with a mixture of pride and something else. A dawning realization that his daughter was not just a quick learner, but a natural-born predator. Meanwhile, the Weaver circus continued its tragicomic collapse. Isolde's pregnancy became public knowledge, a final, grotesque punchline. Mr. Weaver, a man whose desperation had curdled into insanity, truly believed the child was Silas Croft's golden ticket. He dragged a hobbling, hollow-eyed Isolde from one media outlet to another, selling a sob story about a vulnerable girl taken advantage of by a powerful predator. It was a spectacular miscalculation. The Croft family, now led by Helena's ruthlessly efficient children, didn't even bother with lawyers. They simply released a single devastating statement to the press. Due to a medical condition resulting from a past accident, Mr. Silas Croft has been incapable of fathering children for over a decade. Any claims to the contrary are not only false but legally actionable as defamation and extortion. The media feeding frenzy that followed was merciless. The Weavers were eviscerated. They became a national joke, a cautionary tale of greed and delusion. Their remaining social connections evaporated overnight. They were pariahs. I watched it all from a distance, my interest clinical. The video of Isolde's beating was my insurance policy, locked in a digital vault. I had no need to use it. They were destroying themselves. One evening as I was working late, my father came into my office. He didn't speak at first, just stood by the window watching the city lights twinkle on. "The Weaver situation," he said finally, his voice quiet. "It's a mess." "It is," I agreed, not looking up from my financial reports. "I heard from Arthur Chase today. Brian's father." He paused. He thanked me. That made me look up. "Thanked you. For my daughter's discretion. He said you could have made it much worse for them. Publicly." He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "He said you showed restraint." I thought of the video. Of the threat I'd wielded against Croft's lackey. Restraint wasn't the word I would have used. But I understood the game. The Chases believed I had done them a favor by containing the scandal, by allowing them to deal with their shame in private. It was a fiction but a useful one. It built a debt. "It was a private tragedy," I said, my voice neutral. "There was no need to make it a public spectacle." My father nodded slowly. "That's the difference," he said almost to himself. "That's the line. You're learning it." He left me then, and I sat in the deepening dark, his words settling around me. I wasn't sure if I was learning the line or just learning to hide the bodies better. Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed. The scandal faded from the headlines, replaced by newer, juicier dramas. The Weavers disappeared from public view, retreating into their cramped, shame-filled apartment. I heard snippets through Celeste and the society gossip mill. Isolde had the baby. A boy. Mr. Weaver had a stroke from the stress and was partially paralyzed. The burden of care fell to Kaelin and a broken Isolde. Kaelin. I wondered about him. The man who had chosen self-preservation over the woman he claimed to love. How was he weathering this? His job at Telos Systems was surely gone. His name was mud in the business world. He was trapped, caring for a crippled father, a disfigured, depressed Isolde, and a child that might be his own or his dead best friend's. It should have been enough. I had my life back. I had my company. I had my family's respect. The past was avenged. But it wasn't enough. The memory of that rooftop, the cold wind, the utter emptiness. It was a ghost that wouldn't leave me. I had dismantled his life, but I hadn't looked him in the eye while I did it. I hadn't seen the light finally go out. I needed that. I needed to know he was broken. An opportunity presented itself in the most mundane way. My father handed me a new project, a corporate outreach program. Vance International was to fund a new wing for the city's public library system. It was a philanthropy project good for PR, utterly boring. But it involved a gala fundraiser. And the committee in charge of the event had, in a stunning lack of due diligence, hired a new event coordinator to help with the logistics. His name was Kaelin Weaver. Desperation had forced him to take a job far beneath his station, no doubt using a fake name or hoping no one would make the connection. But I knew. My network of informants was excellent. I decided I would attend the gala. The night of the event, I dressed with deliberate, devastating simplicity. A sheath dress the color of midnight, no jewelry except for my grandmother's jade ring. I wanted my presence to be a statement of pure, unadorned power, not wealth. I arrived late, making an entrance. The library's great hall was filled with the city's elite, sipping champagne and congratulating themselves on their own generosity. I saw him immediately. He was across the room wearing a cheap, ill-fitting black suit, directing a waiter with a tray of canapés. He looked thinner, older. There were deep lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His handsome face was etched with a permanent look of harried anxiety. He was a ghost of the arrogant boy I'd once loved. Our eyes met. The color drained from his face. For a moment he looked like a rabbit caught in a snare, frozen in sheer abject terror. Then the terror was replaced by a hot, shameful flush. He quickly looked away, pretending to be intensely interested in the placement of a floral arrangement. I smiled. I made my rounds, greeting the mayor, the library board, making a generous donation publicly into the microphone. All the while I was aware of him, a frantic, scurrying presence at the edge of the room, trying desperately to avoid me. I decided to take a walk through the library's rare book section, a quiet, wood-paneled room away from the noise of the party. I knew he would follow. He had to. I was standing before a glass case containing a first edition of Fitzgerald when I heard his footsteps behind me. They stopped. I didn't turn around. Ilara. His voice was rough, strained. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before I slowly turned to face him. Kaelin, I said, my tone flat, devoid of any emotion. Or do you go by something else these days? He flinched. What are you doing here? I donated the new wing, I said mildly, gesturing around us. I thought I should see what my money is buying. It's a lovely party. You've done an adequate job. The condescension was a deliberate knife twist. His jaw tightened. Is that why you came? To gloat? To look down on me? I took a step closer, my eyes scanning his worn-out suit, his tired face. I don't need to come here to look down on you, Kaelin. You've done that to yourself. He looked away, his shoulders slumping. The fight went out of him, replaced by a weary defeat that was even more satisfying than his anger. Why? He whispered, the word choked. Why did you do it? You destroyed everything. Brian is dead. Isolde is... she's a shell. My father can't speak. Was it just because I didn't want to marry you? Was your pride worth all of this? A cold laugh escaped me. It sounded alien even to my own ears. You think this is about pride? You think this is about some slighted ego because you chose another woman? I took another step, closing the distance between us. He shrank back against a bookshelf. This is about justice, I said, my voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. This is about the life you stole from me. The future you took. You didn't just not want to marry me, Kaelin. You used me. You took my money, my ideas, my labor, and you built your company on my back. And then, when you had everything you needed, you showed me exactly what I was worth to you. Nothing. Less than nothing. A nuisance to be disposed of. He was shaking his head, his eyes wide with confusion. What are you talking about? We never had a company. You left. You broke off the engagement and then you changed. You became this. He gestured at me, at my dress, my composure, my power. This ice queen. Of course he didn't remember. He had only lived one life. The life of failure and ruin I had engineered. He had no memory of the other timeline, of the success we had built together, of the will he had signed that left me destitute. The realization was a shock. My revenge was entirely one-sided. He was suffering the consequences of crimes he didn't even know he'd committed. The irony was so perfect, so brutal that it took my breath away. The anger that had sustained me for months suddenly felt hollow. What was the point of breaking a man who didn't even understand why he was being broken? But then I looked at him. I saw the weakness in his eyes, the selfishness, the inherent sense of entitlement that had made him believe he could use me and discard me in that other life. That hadn't changed. He was still the same man. He would have done it. He just hadn't been given the chance. It doesn't matter, I said, my voice regaining its icy calm. You're right. I changed. I evolved. And you're exactly where you belong. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single thick envelope. I held it out to him. He stared at it, suspicious, afraid. What is it? A severance package, I said. There's $10,000 in there. Consider it my parting gift. My final payment for services never rendered. The insult was calculated, designed to be unforgivable. I was paying him off like a dismissed servant. His face contorted with a mixture of rage and humiliation. He slapped the envelope out of my hand. Bills fluttered to the floor between us. I don't want your money, he snarled, his voice cracking. Oh, I think you do, I said softly, looking down at the scattered cash. I think you need it desperately. For your father's medicine. For Isolde's upkeep. For the child. What did you name him, by the way? He looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred. It was the look I had come for. The look from the rooftop. Now it was his turn to feel that bottomless despair. Get out, he whispered, his whole body trembling. I smiled. A small, cold, final smile. No, I said. I think I'll stay and enjoy the rest of the party. It is for a good cause after all. I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him standing there amidst the money he couldn't bring himself to pick up, surrounded by the ruins of a life I had systematically demolished. As I rejoined the glittering crowd, I felt nothing. No joy, no sorrow, no satisfaction. Just a vast, echoing emptiness. The revenge was complete. I had won. So why did it feel like I had just lost something I could never get back? The library gala should have been the final note. The perfect, crushing coda to my symphony of revenge. I had stood over Kalen, seen the hatred in his eyes, and left him broken amidst the scattered pieces of his pride. It was the image I'd carried with me from the rooftop, his triumph, my despair, finally inverted. But the satisfaction I'd craved was ash in my mouth. Walking away from him that night, the applause of the glittering crowd felt like a mockery. I had become the ice queen he'd named me, a sovereign of a frozen, empty kingdom. The ghost of the rooftop hadn't been banished. It had moved in with me, a permanent resident in the penthouse of my success. Work became my only refuge. I buried myself in Vance International, driving projects with a manic intensity that left my teams exhausted and my father concerned. I was building an empire, but it felt like I was constructing a monument around a void. The board's respect, the industry's fear, my parents' proud looks. It all rang hollow. Celeste tried to pull me out of it. For God's sake, Alara, you won. The Weavers are a cautionary tale people tell their daughters. Kalen is a nobody pushing paper for minimum wage. Isolde is a recluse. Let's go to Paris. Get disgustingly drunk. Find you a boy toy who doesn't know the first thing about leveraged buyouts. I declined. Paris held no allure. The only thing that sparked any feeling in me was the cold, precise execution of a business strategy. It was the one part of my old life, my real life, that still made sense. It was during a brutally long session reviewing acquisition targets that my father found me. The The sun had set hours ago and my office was illuminated only by the cool glow of my monitor and the city lights beyond the glass. "You're working too hard," he said from the doorway. He didn't come in. He just leaned against the frame watching me. "There's work to be done," I replied, not looking up from a spreadsheet. "There will always be work to be done. This isn't healthy, Alara. This isn't living." "I'm alive," I said, the words flat. He was silent for a long moment. "Your mother and I are worried. You've hardened. This vengeance of yours. It's consumed you." That made me look up. It wasn't vengeance. It was justice. "And it's over." "Is it?" He walked in and sat in the chair opposite my desk, steepling his fingers. "Then why do you look like you're the one who lost?" I had no answer for him. The truth was too monstrous to speak aloud. That in destroying Kaylin, I had destroyed the last remnants of the girl I used to be. The hopeful, foolish, loving girl. And I missed her. I missed her terrible, naive trust. I missed the belief that love could be enough. I had excised her like a cancer, and now I was left with this cold, efficient shell. "I'm fine, Father," I lied. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "I'm stepping down." The words hung in the air, stark and unexpected. "What?" "At the end of the quarter. I'm retiring. Your mother and I, we want to travel. See the world while we still can. We've spent our lives building this." He gestured around the office, at the tower, at the city. "It's time to enjoy it." I stared at him, my mind scrambling. "But, the company will be yours." He said it simply, as if stating a fact of nature. "He'll full control. The board is already prepared. They've seen what you can do. They're intimidated, frankly. And a little terrified. Which is exactly what a good CEO should inspire." He stood up and placed a hand on my desk, leaning forward. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? The crown? Well, it's yours. Now learn to wear it without it costing you your soul." He left me then with the weight of an entire empire settling onto my shoulders. It was everything I had ever worked for in my first life, everything I had fought for, everything Kaylin had taken from me. Now it was being handed to me on a silver platter. And I felt nothing but a profound, echoing dread. The announcement was made a week later. Alara Vance, age 24, was named CEO of Vance International. The business world erupted. It was all anyone could talk about. Profiles were written, analyzing my every move, my every success. I was hailed as a prodigy, a visionary. The headlines called me the Ice Queen Ascendant. I sat through the interviews, the photo shoots, the board meetings where I officially took the reins. I smiled the cool, composed smile they expected. I spoke with authority about growth and innovation. I played the part perfectly. But inside I was numb. The crown, as my father had called it, was heavy and cold. It felt less like a reward and more like a life sentence. It was in the midst of this hollow triumph that the past, like a stubborn weed, pushed its way through the cracks in my perfect ice. I received a letter. It was delivered by hand to my office on cheap, thin paper. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. "Miss Vance, I know I have no right to write to you. I know you must hate me. But I am desperate. Kaylin is sick. Very sick. The doctors, they say it's advanced. He doesn't have much time. He won't go back to the hospital. He says he can't afford it, that he deserves it. He's given up. I have no one else to turn to. I know what you think of me. I know what I am. But he's all I have left. And the baby, he needs his father. Please, if you ever cared for him at all, please help. There is no one else. Sold." I read the letter twice. Then a third time. The paper felt flimsy in my hands, a pathetic cry from a world I thought I'd left behind. Advance. The word echoed in my mind. In my first life, Kaylin had died from advanced stomach cancer. He'd hidden the symptoms, too proud and too broke to see a doctor until it was far too late. He jumped from a rooftop when the pain became too much, and the futility of his situation became undeniable. The timeline was accelerating. A part of me, the cold, victorious queen, sneered. "Let him die. Let him suffer. It's what he deserves. It's what he did to you." But another part, a smaller, quieter part that had somehow survived the freeze, remembered something else. The doctor in that other life had said if he'd caught it just a few months earlier, there was a chance. A fighting chance. This letter wasn't just a plea for help. It was a test. A final, cosmic test. I could do nothing. I could let the disease take him. It would be the truly ruthless thing to do. The ultimate victory. Or I could intervene. Not for him. Never for him. But for that faint, ghostly echo of the girl I used to be. The girl who believed in mercy. The girl who hadn't yet learned how to hate. I crumpled the letter in my fist. The decision should have been easy. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I picked up my private phone. I didn't call a doctor. I called my head of security. "I have a task for you," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. "There's a man. Kalen Weaver. He's living in the old textile mill district. Find him. Don't be gentle. Take him to Cedar Ridge Medical. Use the van swing. Register him under a pseudonym. John Doe. Tell the chief oncologist, Dr. Evans, that money is no object. Every test, every scan, every experimental treatment. I want it done. I want it done yesterday." There was a pause on the other end. "Ms. Vance, is this advisable? Given the history." "The history is irrelevant," I said, my tone leaving no room for question. "This is a medical necessity. See that it's done. And ensure there is no connection to me. None whatsoever." I hung up. My hands were trembling. I had just thrown a lifeline to the man I hated most in this world or any other. Why? The question haunted me for days. I told myself it was because a quick death was too good for him. I told myself I wanted him to live in his failure, to endure the slow, humiliating grind of a life without prospects. I told myself it was a more refined form of cruelty. But I was lying. The truth was, I was tired of being the Ice Queen. I was tired of the cold. The revenge had been perfect, and it had left me emptier than before. A week later, a confidential medical report appeared on my desk, delivered through secure channels. John Doe. Diagnosis: Stage 3 adenocarcinoma. Prognosis: guarded but significantly improved with immediate and aggressive treatment. Projected survival rate with full treatment: 60 to 70%. He would live. I set the report on my desk and looked out at the city. The sun was rising, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and rose. He would live. And I would have to find a way to live with that. The game was over. I had won every battle, but the war had cost me my taste for blood. The crown was on my head, the empire at my feet. But the victory felt different now. It wasn't sweet. It was complex. It was human. And for the first time since I'd opened my eyes in that pink canopied bed, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a beginning. The knowledge that Kalen was alive, that he was fighting a battle in a sterile, anonymous room paid for by my anonymous mercy, created a strange dissonance in my life. The hollow feeling in my chest didn't vanish, but it changed. It was no longer the void of victory. It was the quiet of a suspended sentence. I threw myself into the role of CEO with a new, less frantic energy. It was no longer an escape. It was my reality. My birthright. And I was damn good at it. The board's initial trepidation melted into genuine respect as I navigated a potential trade war, acquired a rival tech firm, and launched a green initiative that actually boosted profits. I was becoming a legend in the business pages, the Ice Queen who delivered results. My father and mother left for a 6-month world cruise, their trust in me absolute. The Vance empire was mine alone to steer. It was during this period of focused calm that a ghost from my other life resurfaced. Not Kalen. Not Isolde. Someone from the brief, bright period after I'd married Kalen, when we were still a team, still building something together. His name was Julian Croft. No relation to the odious Silas. Julian was the black sheep of a different, far more powerful Croft family. Intellectuals and venture capitalists, not mining barons. In my first life, he had been our first major investor. He'd believed in our startup when no one else would. He was brilliant, eccentric, and possessed a terrifyingly prescient understanding of technology. He'd been the one to see the potential in my ideas, not just Kalen's charm. After Kalen's suicide and Isolde's takeover, Julian had quietly sold his shares and vanished from the industry. I'd always wondered what happened to him. Now a memo crossed my desk. A proposal from a tiny cutting-edge R&D firm called Quantum Leap Labs. They were working on something revolutionary. Quantum computing applications for real-time logistics and AI-driven market prediction. The science was so advanced most of the board had dismissed it as science fiction. But the name of the lead researcher and founder made my breath catch. Dr. Julian Croft. He was back. And he was looking for funding. A wave of nostalgia, sharp and painful, hit me. Julian had been a friend. A real one. He tried to warn me about Kaylin's closeness to Isolde, but I'd been too love-blind to listen. He'd been the only one to offer genuine condolences at my lowest point, not the empty platitudes of others. Without a second thought, I approved the funding. A substantial Series A investment. I didn't do it for sentimental reasons. Quantum Leap's research was, in my professional opinion, the future. But the personal connection was an undeniable pull. A week later, Julian was in my office. He looked older, his hair a bit wilder, his eyes still holding that same manic, brilliant light. But there was a new wariness in them, a caution born from his own past failures. "Miss Vance," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. "Thank you for seeing me. And for the investment. Most people think I'm a madman." "Most people thought Galileo was a madman, Dr. Croft," I said, gesturing for him to sit. "I prefer to invest in madmen with compelling data." He smiled, a quick, genuine thing that erased the years of weariness from his face. "The data is compelling. But you already know that. Your analysis of our proposal was startlingly insightful. It's like you already understand the architecture of a technology that won't exist for another 5 years." I kept my expression neutral. "I have a good team." We spoke for an hour. About quantum states, algorithmic trading, supply chain optimization. It was a dance of intellects. He was still the genius I remembered, but I was no longer the wide-eyed novice. I could match him, concept for concept, prediction for prediction. I saw the moment his professional respect deepened into genuine curiosity. "It's uncanny," he said finally, leaning back in his chair and studying me. "I feel like I've had this conversation before." My heart skipped a beat. Perhaps in a trade journal. Perhaps. He didn't look away. "There's something else. This is going to sound strange. But have we ever met? Before this?" This was dangerous territory. "I don't believe so," I said smoothly. "The Vance and Croft families move in different circles." "Not those Crofts," he said with a dismissive wave. "I mean, personally. There's a familiarity. The way you, I don't know. The way you just know things." I had to shut this down. "I make it my business to know things, Doctor. It's why I'm successful." He accepted the deflection, but the thoughtful look didn't leave his eyes. As he was gathering his things to leave, he paused. "There was a team a few years back. A husband and wife startup. Thornfield Technologies. They were working on something similar, though much more primitive. The husband, he killed himself. Tragic. The wife. I never knew what happened to her. He just disappeared. She was sharp. Had a good mind for the work. It's a shame. He was talking about me. About us. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? The Alara Vance of then was a meek, supportive shadow. The woman in front of him was a CEO in a $5,000 suit. A shame, I echoed, my voice perfectly level. He left and I sat at my desk for a long time, my mind racing. Julian's reappearance was a variable I hadn't accounted for. A connection to a past that no longer existed. It was unsettling. A few days later, my head of security appeared in my office. His name was Mark, an ex-Special Forces man with a face like granite and a loyalty as deep as it was expensive. "A situation, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice low. "Regarding the Weaver matter." I looked up from my computer. "I told you that matter is closed. It seems Mr. Weaver disagrees." Mark placed a single grainy photograph on my desk. It was taken from a long lens. It showed me, leaving Cedar Ridge Medical after one of my discreet visits to check on the John Doe project. I was wearing large sunglasses and a headscarf, but my profile was unmistakable to anyone who knew me well. On the back of the photo, scrawled in a shaky hand, was a message. "I know what you did. We need to talk." Okay. My blood ran cold. Kaylin. He knew. How? Had he seen me? Had a nurse talked? Had he simply guessed? "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "It was delivered to the security desk downstairs. In a plain envelope. The man who dropped it off matched Mr. Weaver's description. He looked unwell. Of course he was unwell. He was in the middle of aggressive chemotherapy. But even sick, even broken, Kaylin was still a predator. He'd caught a scent. The scent of my weakness. My inexplicable, stupid mercy. This was a disaster. All my power, my control, my carefully constructed victory, was threatened by this one reckless act of compassion. If he went public, if he told anyone that Alara Vance was paying for her ex-fiance's cancer treatment, the gossip, the speculation, the humiliation would be endless. My board would question my judgment. My rivals would smell blood in the water. The Ice Queen's facade would crack, and they would see the confused, sentimental girl underneath. Rage, hot and familiar, surged through me. I had tried to be better. I had tried to be human. And he had thrown it back in my face. Find him, I said, my voice like ice. Bring him to me. I don't care how. I don't care what condition he's in. Just bring him. Mark nodded once and left. 2 hours later, the private elevator to my penthouse office dinged. Mark and another security agent escorted a frail, gaunt figure into the room. Killing. The chemotherapy had ravaged him. He was shockingly thin, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. He was leaning heavily on a cane, and he was wearing a worn-out beanie over his bald head. But his eyes burned with the same old intelligence, the same desperate cunning. He looked around my office, taking in the breathtaking view, the priceless art, the absolute, unassailable power it represented. A flicker of pure, undiluted envy crossed his face before he masked it. Alara, he said, his voice a dry rasp. Or should I call you Miss Vance now? Sit, I commanded, not moving from behind my desk. He lowered himself gingerly into the chair, wincing in pain. Mark stood by the door, a silent, imposing sentinel. You've been busy, Kaelin said, a bitter smile twisting his lips. Phew. Quite the promotion from would-have-been wife of a failure. What do you want, Kaelin? I asked, cutting to the chase. The photo was dramatic. The note was cliché. Get to the point. The smile vanished. Why? He asked, the word sharp and sudden. Why are you paying for this? For the doctors? The treatments? Why save the man you worked so hard to destroy? I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. Who says I'm saving you? Perhaps I'm just prolonging the experiment. Chemotherapy is a fascinating process. I'm funding a study on suffering. He flinched, but he didn't back down. No, that's not it. You had your victory. You could have let me die. It would have been the perfect end to your story. So why? He leaned forward, his intense gaze boring into me. What changed? He was too perceptive. He knew me in ways no one else ever had or ever would. He could see the inconsistency, the crack in my armor. I could have lied. I could have threatened him. But suddenly I was tired of the games. The truth, the impossible, unbelievable truth, was the only weapon left that had any power. I died, I said. The words hung in the air, stark and insane. Kaelin stared at me, confusion wiping the cunning from his face. What? I died, I repeated, my voice flat. On a rooftop. After you jumped. After you left everything to Isolde. After I was reduced to being her employee. I stood on the ledge of the building that should have been mine, and I stepped off. His face was a mask of utter incomprehension. Alara, what the hell are you talking about? I never jumped. I'm right here. Not you, I said, a strange calm settling over me. The other you. The you that married me. The you that used my money and my mind to build a company, and then, when you got your diagnosis, you chose to leap into the void and leave every last penny to your white moonlight. You left me with nothing. You humiliated me beyond endurance. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. And then I woke up. Here. Back in my old room. Back to the day you proposed. And I chose differently. The room was silent. I could hear his ragged breathing. You're insane, he whispered, but there was no conviction in it. There was only a dawning, terrible horror. Am I? I turned to face him. How else do you explain it, Kaelin? How do you explain my sudden, absolute rejection of you? My knowledge of business I never studied? My foresight? How do you explain me knowing about your cancer before even you did? How do you explain me saving the life of the man I hate most in this world? I took a step toward him. I lived a life with you. A full, miserable, decade-long life. And you destroyed me in it. So yes, in this life I destroyed you first. I broke your family. I ruined your name. I let Isolde be shattered. I watched your best friend die. I did it all. And I was going to let you die of the same disease that killed the other you. I was standing over him now, looking down at his sick, pale, terrified face. But I didn't, I said, my voice softening almost imperceptibly. Because the woman on that rooftop, she wouldn't have wanted this. She believed in mercy. So I gave you mercy. Not for you. For her. I walked back to my desk and sat down. The confession was out. The impossible truth was laid bare between us. I felt strangely weightless. Kalen was silent for a long time. He just stared at the floor, his mind trying to process the monstrous, reality-shattering concept. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different. The cunning was gone. The envy was gone. All that was left was a hollow, devastated understanding. It's true, he breathed, not a question but a statement. It feels true. He looked at his trembling, skeletal hands. This is my punishment. For a life I didn't even get to live. No, I said, surprising myself. It's your second chance. For a life you now get to live differently. I picked up a pen and wrote a name and number on a card. Dr. Evans. My personal oncologist. The treatment is paid for. Until it's done. After that, you're on your own. You will never contact me again. You will never speak of this. To anyone. I slid the card across the desk. Is that understood? He looked at the card, then at me. The hatred was gone. Replaced by something infinitely more complex. Awe, terror, and a faint, shocking glimmer of gratitude. Understood, he rasped. I nodded to Mark. Take him home. As they let him out, a broken man carrying the weight of a sin he never committed, I knew the dynamic between us had shifted forever. The game was truly over. The ghost had been laid to rest. Both of them. Now there was only the future. The silence after Kalen left was different this time. It wasn't the cold, empty quiet of vengeance, nor the hollow echo of victory. It was the deep, profound stillness that follows a storm. The air felt cleansed. The ghost that had haunted me, the specter of that other life, had finally been exorcised. I had spoken the impossible truth aloud, and in doing so, I had robbed it of its power over me. He knew. He knew the full, horrific, unbelievable scope of what I had done and why. And in some strange way he had accepted it. The debt in some cosmic ledger felt settled. I didn't see or hear from Kalen again. Mark reported that he was attending his treatments diligently, registered under the pseudonym. He was fighting. According to Dr. Evans, his prognosis was improving. He would likely live. The knowledge sat inside me, a neutral fact. It neither pleased nor angered me. It simply was. With the past finally, truly behind me, I found myself able to fully inhabit the present. The weight of the CEO's crown felt different on my head. It was no longer a burden I carried out of duty or a trophy I displayed out of spite. It was a tool. A means to build, not to destroy. My work at Vance International transformed. The relentless, aggressive drive softened into a focused, visionary leadership. I began initiatives that my father had always considered unprofitable but necessary. Extensive parental leave policies, green energy investments that wouldn't see a return for a decade, massive funding for employee education and retraining. The board grumbled initially, but I presented the data with a calm certainty that brooked no argument. I wasn't just predicting markets. I was building a legacy that would outlast quarterly reports. Julian Croft's company, Quantum Leap Labs, became one of our most prized subsidiaries. Our professional relationship deepened into a warm, intellectual friendship. We spent hours in my office or on the video calls, whiteboards covered in equations and wild ideas. He never mentioned his feeling of familiarity again, but I sometimes caught him looking at me with a curious, wondering expression. We were kindred spirits, two brilliant minds building the future. There was no romantic tension, just the pure, exhilarating synergy of mutual respect. He was the partner I should have had all along. Months flowed into a year. My parents returned from their travels, tanned and relaxed. They were astonished by the changes at the company, but their pride was evident. My father would sit in on board meetings, saying nothing, just watching me run the show with a small, satisfied smile on his face. One afternoon he came into my office. "I'm selling my shares," he announced without preamble. I looked up, startled. "What? Father, why?" "To you," he said, his eyes twinkling. "At a massively discounted rate. This is your company now, Alara. Not just in title but in spirit. Your mother and I, we want to truly retire. Buy a villa in Tuscany. Drink too much wine. It's time for a clean break." It was the final surrender of the throne. The complete passing of the torch. There were no more tests, no more lessons. Just trust. The transaction made me the majority shareholder. I was no longer just the CEO. I was Vance International. The day the papers were signed, I felt a sense of completion so profound it brought tears to my eyes. I had not only reclaimed the life that was stolen from me, I had forged a new one, stronger and more meaningful than anything I could have imagined. It was on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday that the final thread of the old life was snipped. I was working late, reviewing plans for a new sustainable housing project, when my private line rang. It was Dr. Evans. "Miss Vance," he said, his tone professional but carrying a note of finality. "I'm calling about John Doe." My pen stilled. "Yes. His final round of treatment concluded last week. We just received the latest scans." He paused. "He's in remission. The cancer is undetectable. His prognosis is excellent. Barring any unforeseen complications, he should make a full recovery." I closed my eyes. Remission. He had done it. He had fought his way back from the edge. "Thank you, doctor," I said, my voice even. "Please ensure he has all the necessary information for ongoing maintenance and monitoring. The Vance funding for his case is now concluded." "Understood." "He asked me to give you a message." I stiffened. "I don't want a message." "I think you'll want this one," Dr. Evans said gently. He just said, "Tell her thank you. And goodbye." The line went dead. I sat there in the silence of my office, the words hanging in the air. Thank you. And goodbye. It was over. Truly, completely over. I felt a single hot tear trace a path down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. It wasn't a tear for him. It was a tear for the girl I had been. The woman I had become. The long, painful, necessary journey between the two. I stood up and walked to the window. The city was laid out before me, a glittering tapestry of light and life. My city. My kingdom. Not won through marriage or manipulation, but built through my own mind, my own strength, my own choices. I thought about the future. There was so much to do. The housing project. The quantum computing research with Julian. There were board meetings and galas and 1,000 decisions to make. But for the first time, I also thought about other things. Things I had denied myself. The possibility of a life beyond these glass walls. A relationship that wasn't born from calculation or destroyed by betrayal. A family of my own, one built on a foundation of respect and equality, not lies and greed. The ice queen was melting. And I was glad. I turned my back on the dazzling view and walked to my desk. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Celeste answered on the first ring. "Your Majesty. To what do I owe the honor? Another corporate coup? Should I bring my own champagne?" I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "No coup. I was thinking about Paris. You free next weekend?" There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then a whoop of joy. "Is the Pope Catholic?" "How yes, I'm free." Sopping. Obscene amounts of wine. Ridiculously handsome Frenchman with no concept of personal space. "All of the above," I laughed. It felt good. "Book the tickets. The Vance jet is at your disposal." I hung up, the sound of her excitement still buzzing in the air. I looked around my office at the symbols of my power and my victory. They were just things. Important things, meaningful things, but things nonetheless. The real victory was inside me. It was the peace I felt. The absence of the cold fury that had fueled me for so long. It was the ability to look forward without the shadow of the past darkening every step. I had been given a second chance. A chance to rewrite my story. And I had written a masterpiece. The